you're going to hear tonight. Okay. This talk that you're going to hear tonight was initially given to the St Agnes log a few weeks ago, and it was really well received. And that's how this came about. That we thought it'd be a great idea for more people to be able to enjoy it and hear about the conservation work that's been going on the Isles of Scilly. So hopefully by the end of tonight, I think you'll all agree that this, in a normal year, this talk would have been worthy of the headline act on a Saturday night after the log call up at the Sloanian Club. But that might be in a future year maybe. But for now, we're happy that you can join us all on Zoom. So just to introduce everyone, I'm hosting tonight on behalf of the Bird Group. I'm Scott Reid. I'm the Conservation Officer for the ISBG. And you'll just be coming back to me occasionally. I won't be doing any of the talks, but I'm just here to host the evening. We've also got with us tonight Julian Branscombe, who is the new Interim CEO of the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust. We've also got Dr. Vickie Heaney, who will be taking the first part of the talk on seabird conservation on the Isles of Scilly, and then Jaclyn Pearson, the RSPB Islands and Biosecurity Officer for Scilly. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Julian for a few words from the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust.
Well, I'm just very pleased to join the staff of the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust. And I'm finding it wonderful to be somewhere where there's not just an excellent range of seabirds, but where there's a long history of seabird recording, and where we're also proud to have a leading example of island restoration. Another real pleasure for me, as well as working alongside Jaclyn and Jaclyn from the RSPB, Scott and everyone at the Isles of Scilly Bird Group, is to have Vickie Heaney on the staff. It's great to have that seabird ecology expertise in-house. And looking at the years ahead, there's clearly a lot we've got to do to carry on making sure that we're monitoring the seabirds in the Isles of Scilly and taking every opportunity we can to continue the opportunities to restore our islands to give the best possible prospects for our breeding seabirds. Lots to do in the future, and this evening will give us a taste of that. So I think it's for me to hand back briefly to Scott to introduce the first of our main speakers, Vickie.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. And just to echo Julian's words on behalf of the Bird Group, the work that has been done over the years and will continue to be done from all the partners involved, from the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust and from the RSPB, primarily Vickie and Jaclyn, has been incredible, and it's nationally famous, globally famous in some respects, and long may it continue. And from all the birders and the wildlife enthusiasts amongst us all, we're very thankful of it. So for the first part of the main talk this evening, I'd like to hand you over to Dr. Vickie Heaney.
Thank you very much, Scott. Great to be here. And just to say that if you see my picture at any point, it says Isles of Scilly Museum. That is a mistake. Unfortunately, with technology, I've been unable to call myself Vickie Heaney. I'm a trustee at the museum, and I use the Zoom for that as well. But yeah, so my talk tonight, I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Isles of Scilly seabirds and the work that I do with the Wildlife Trust, funded by the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, counting the seabirds. So a bit about the work in 2021 and a little bit of background to that as well, so how they're doing. Okay, next slide. So particularly at this time of year, the Isles of Scilly are very much known for their migrant birds, but they're also a very special place for seabirds as well. And we are we have internationally important birds. So we've got a lot of designations that are based on our seabirds, The SPA, so that Special Protection Area, that recently in the last year has been extended out from the land area out into the water, so it starts to protect some of those seas that actually feed our seabirds. We're a Ramsar site, triple SI, so that's sites of special scientific interest. We have 26 of those, and at least half of them are known particularly for their seabird interest. So it's about the numbers of seabirds, but also the assemblage. It's the number of different types of seabirds that we have here. As I said, we have internationally important numbers of things like storm petrel and lesser black-backed gull. Then we have nationally important, regionally important, pretty much all of our birds are important in this, for England at least. I used to be able to say we were the foremost seabird site in the southwest of England. Unfortunately, Lundy has just pipped us now with that. They've got a few more birds than we do so lately, but that's great news for Lundy and further challenge for us, really. Okay, next slide, please. One of the really cool things for Scilly and our seabirds is we have a really good data set. We have a long set of data of how many birds there have been and where they are and what types over many years. I became involved with seabird counting on Scilly as part of Seabird 2000. So that was accounts happened across the UK. In here, the data point on this graph is 1999. It sort of started through 1999, 2000. And most recently, our count was in 2015 and 16. And that gave us a total of just over 8,000 pairs of breeding seabirds supported across Scilly. What's quite obvious, though, from this graph is that our numbers have been going down. So from a high in the early 80s of 12,000 pairs, we've lost roughly a quarter of that, or even, sorry, a third. This is not something that's unique to Scilly. Seabirds across the world are pretty much known as the most threatened bird group. So there's a lot of reasons in there for that. I won't go into those at this point, but what's really important to do in between these big counts, so this last count, like I say, in 2015 involved getting on every island and counting every bird. It's a big undertaking. It doesn't happen every year, but in the interim years, it's important to look at key sites and species and trying to find out what's happening, the sort of breeding success, the reasons behind these changes in numbers. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some of the not as great news and hopefully end on a high. If the numbers are going down, something has to be suffering, and it's the gulls and the terns and the kittiwakes are our key species that we're sort of reducing numbers of. So herring gulls have recently red listed in the UK because of declines. We have about 500 pairs breeding across the islands of Scilly, and they have declined by as much as 20% since between the two last big surveys. The two sites that I've been looking at each year in between have been on Sampson and also in Hewtown. We have about 20 pairs that nest on the rooftops in Hewtown each year. And they are, there's no key on this, so actually it's the light blue bars are the Hewtown birds. And as you can see, they actually do okay. So they're producing sometimes as many as 2 chicks per nest. And that's enough to keep the colony stable. So that's looking at the productivity, the number of chicks you need to be fledging each year. When you look at the adult survival and the chick survival to breeding, that's how many you need to be getting away from each nest each year for the numbers to stay stable or increase. The dark blue bars are actually Sampson. So these are birds on the northern beaches of Sampson, a more natural site. And although that's a minimum estimate of fledging, sometimes the chicks hide and I don't find them. We can see there that that sort of productivity is one of the reasons why those numbers are declining. They're just not fledging enough chicks at this point. Go to the next graph. So we're looking at common terns. So this is the number of common terns breeding across all of Scilly, so at all different sites. And not a pretty picture, I'm afraid. So in the last 3 years, in fact, we had no confirmed breeding of common terns. Exciting thing is in 2021, we did have 18 pairs that nested on the south end of Annet. So Scott came out with me and we did a count of those, and they fledged maybe 3 or 4 chicks, so not, three for sure. But what they are doing, the birds they seem to be returning very late to the islands, the common terns. So they really should be coming in April and breeding, sort of laying their eggs by May. These birds didn't really lay their eggs until mid to late June. So it means when their chicks fledging, it's later in the year, so probably harder for them to survive that first winter. but at the same time, still at least more positive than the last 3 years for the common terns this time. Next slide. Kittiwakes, I'm afraid it's another sad tale. Those graphs in between 1999 and 2006 just means we didn't have a count those years. If there's actually no birds, it will be 0. So in fact, 2021 is the first year in recent history that we recorded no kittiwake nesting attempts on Scilly. So there were kittiwake adults around at the beginning of the season, but they showed a little bit of interest in the cliffs on Gew, where they have been breeding the last few years, but there was no actual nests built. So unfortunately, kittiwakes, we are at the far edge of their range. They've been lost at nearby sites like the Channel Islands recently, and unfortunately it seems that they are soon to be not a regular breeder for Scilly either. Next slide. Okay, it starts to get a little bit more positive. So this is Annet, and Annet is really the main seabird island for Scilly. So it's our triple SI that's particularly for seabirds. It's the one that one of the islands that the landing is very much prohibited, and that's because of the number of seabirds breeding there through the summer, but also in the winter it's a key site for the grey seals to haul out and pup. As our Seabird Ecologist, I'm very privileged and do appreciate that I'm able to land on Annet a few times a year. The first main count we do is at the end of May, and that's for the ground nesting gulls and shags. I think when people sort of ask me, when I say I'm counting the birds, there's this idea, you land on the island and all the birds fly up in the air and you start to try and count them. But what, of course, we're actually counting is the number of nests on the ground with eggs in. So we'll walk around the island and count the nests, the active nests. And in the last 5 or 6 years, the numbers have been very stable on Annet. So about 100 pairs of shags, and the count this year, so it was 106 for shags, and for greater blackback gulls, 184. And that's a very significant colony for greater blackbacks. We're nationally important now for those birds, the apex predators for Scilly. Manx, shearwaters and storm petrels we also count. So Manx shearwater a little bit later in June, and then storm petrels, because they're slightly different in their laying times, we don't actually count those until mid-July. And their numbers look to be pretty stable, in fact, possibly increasing on Annet, which is great news. Puffins, everybody wants to know about. They seem to be doing okay on Annet. It's very hard to count puffins because they are birds that nest underground in burrows, but also here a lot of the time they're just underneath rocks, so there's not even an obvious burrow entrance. So what we're doing is counting the number of birds associated with the island, so rafting in the evening around Annet or around the different islands where they breed, in April and early May, so when it's just the breeding adults there. And it's about 45 pairs have been pretty regularly now for the last 10 years or so breeding on Annet. Next slide, please. So this is when we come to some of the exciting stuff. You'll hear a little bit more from Jaclyn about the Seabird Recovery Project, but this is some of the results that have come as a result of that rat removal. And it's the burrow nesters that have really benefited. So if you see before the red line of rat removal in the winter of 2013-14, the numbers of shearwaters across St Agnes and Gew were pretty low and variable. Somewhere around 20 pairs or so would breed each year or try. I think very rarely would be successful, and they're long-lived birds, and then there'll be maybe a few birds joining from other colonies, but probably just sort of hanging in there really. And it's only once the rats were removed that we started to see this wonderful increase in numbers. In 2020, we didn't have a count because of COVID, but in 2021, we were looking at a record 82 pairs. So this is apparently occupied burrows. And just as a sort of quick aside on how we count shearwaters, they again, like puffins and storm petrels, are underground, so you're not able to see an egg with a nest with an egg in. So what you're actually doing is using a recording of their call, and you play it at a burrow entrance. So I'm going to just do a little thing from my phone for a moment. So a number of you will have heard that noise, particularly if you've ever camped on St Agnes, but that is the sound of a Manx shearwater. And what I'm doing then, myself and the rangers or whoever's coming and helping me surveying, we'll play that call at the burrow entrance. And if a bird is down there incubating its egg, it takes it as a challenge and calls back, and we can record an apparently occupied burrow. There is a slight problem with this because not all birds will reply. It's sort of shown that the males are more likely to reply than females, and so the loop of the recording that we play has both male and female calls on it, which tends to help. But if we look at the next slide a moment, if you're ever walking around St Agnes and Gew, you might see these little brown lollipop sticks, and this means that I've had a reply from that burrow, and I know that a bird down there has been incubating its egg. On the right hand side here, though, this is a close up underneath a rock by Troy Town campsite. There's actually 2 good burrows either side of this picture, and there's lots of evidence that they're occupied. There's lots of scrapings and footmarks. There's various bits of vegetation has been nibbled. There's guano. So I'm pretty sure there's birds down there. And in fact, one of these burrows actually produced a chick later, but I never got an adult replying during the incubation phase. So what you have is a correction factor which accounts for those birds that don't reply. And at the moment, we're just getting to enough burrows now on St Agnes and Gew that we can start to work out our own correction factor, because it turns out that response rate differs between seasons and between sites. And we've just been using a standard one. And I think this year, looking at the results, it seems that what we've been doing is assuming that too many more birds reply than do. So we're assuming that sort of 9 out of 10 will reply when we play the tape. And it seems it's actually more like 5 out of 10. And that's what a lot of recent studies have been finding. So I think we'll be repeating that next year. We might find that our number of Manx shearwaters estimated population is going to jump quite soon, which is very exciting. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, so there's one before that with the red chick. For looking at breeding success for Manx shearwaters, a lot of sites have got inspection burrows. So it's all happening down this burrow, and people have got a lot of sites, places on like Scoma, where you've got a lot of university students studying the birds. You can actually lift the lid and see what's going on in there. We haven't got that on Scilly, but what we do have is the chicks have this behaviour of stargazing. So in the sort of 10 days before they're ready to fledge, they'll actually come out of their burrow and explore and have a little flap of their wings and have a look around. And there's an idea they may be stargazing, and that's sort of how they will find their way back to Scilly in years to come. But what I've been done then is through August and September in the last few years is I've been doing walks after dark. And it's all happening after dark because the birds are very vulnerable to gull predation. That's why you'll see the big rafts of the adults off the island in the evening. They're waiting for darkness to fall before they can come in and either change over their incubation shift or feed their chicks. And the chicks again are waiting for that darkness, for the safeness of darkness to come out. So before rat removal on the walks, we never encountered any chicks. And then, as you can see, after rat removal, the number of chicks have been increasing year on year, and we had a record 55 chicks this year. So that's been absolutely fabulous to be part of a project which has had such a demonstrable and positive effect for the birds. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so there's one of the chicks there, and just with a red light to reduce disturbance when you're walking around looking for them. Next slide. So storm petrels, they have also returned to breed. So actually there's no record of them having bred on St Agnes and Gew for a long time, but they've returned now. The rats have been removed, and we've seen increasing numbers, and they're moving into new areas. So this year we found them out on Pedney Brow, which is a lovely area of Boulder Beach, out on Wingletown on Agnes. And that was the first time they've been out that way that we found. And this picture on the right here is from a camera trap out on Burnt Island on St Agnes. And again, this is a small chick fledging, taking its first flights. This is actually from a video, and basically it sort of does a little flutter and then flops into the bushes. So clearly not an adult that's very good at flying yet. So success for the storm petrels too. Well, next slide, please. This is for the lesser blackbacks. So what we've been doing, lesser blackbacks, we have internationally important numbers again, like the storm petrels, about 2,500 pairs across Scilly. And they're on the three main sites, three main sub-colonies are Sampson, St Helens and Gew. And the Gew numbers in particular, we've been looking at every year. And for the counts, it's a case of having a line of 5 or 6 of us walking through a couple of meters apart and counting every nest between us. Obviously, all the birds are up in the air. They come down pretty quickly behind. So it is an intensive disturbance at the point of the count, but it's very quick and goes through, and they come back quite happily behind. But in recent years, a lot of surveyors have been using drones to help with gull counting. And so we decided this year we should try this. And I worked with Gareth Tibbs, who's a resident of Briar and is a very good drone pilot. And he was able to help. So he was able to do the actual drone flying while I could look at the response of the birds. And he was able to program the drone to sort of fly back and forth in a measured manner. So it covered the whole of the colony from above. And then it was about 700 photos for that top colony on Gew. You feed those into a computer program and it produces an ortho mosaic, which is basically knitting them all together to produce a massive detailed picture, sort of looking down from above on all of the colony. And next slide. What you can see, so this actually isn't a great image because it's actually taken from the computer screen. I'm not able to download the image directly onto my computer for the talk. But what I can do on this picture is zoom right in and see where the birds are and just put a click on, and then I can see how many nests there are in the area. And it's great for accurately counting the birds on the ground. It also helps with birds that are deep in bracken that would be impossible to get to on foot. So I'm very pleased if this in the future means I don't have to plough through bracken and bramble to count the birds. But if we look at the next slide, one of the issues with this method is distinguishing birds that are actually incubating and birds that are standing nearby. So the picture on the left here, we've got 2 lesser blackbacks that I'm pretty sure are on nests. So this is the quality of the image up close. On the right hand side, so there's a lesser blackback bird just tucked in under the vegetation at the top there. I'm positive that's on a nest. The 2 birds in the middle are probably on a nest, and obviously you can see that you can distinguish there's a couple of herring gulls in and amongst the lesser blackback colony on Gew. The bird at the bottom, though, I'm pretty sure is a bird that's just standing. Happily, for some lesser blackbacks, you can actually see a yellow foot, or maybe depending on the time of day, you might get a bit of shadow, which helps you distinguish a standing bird. But obviously, if you end up counting standing birds, you'll end up with an inflated count. For next year, Gareth is planning to get a new drone, and apparently it has 7 times the zoom of this one. So I'm very excited that this will be a really great way of checking those birds. We found, so these pictures were taken from about 30 meters height, but and this worked very well on Gew. The birds were not bothered by the drone at all. We tried it on Sampson, and bizarrely, same species, a lot more herring gulls in the area we wanted to try on Sampson. They were much more bothered by the drone. So even at 80 meters, they were still concerned and flying around at the oyster catchers in particular. So we abandoned that at this point for welfare of the birds in particular. If there'd been a collision, I don't think it would have been good for the bird or the drone. But we're trying next year, if we've got this better drone, we'll be able to go higher and still get a good picture. So that's really exciting for next year. Great. Okay, next slide, please. So this is later in the season. This is with the chicks. So you can see these are actually young chicks that I'm circling here. So we can get an idea of productivity again using the drone. And again, with a better resolution, that will be more obvious because the chicks, they're not as bright as the adults. They're a bit more camouflaged. They're not as easy to see, and sometimes they're tucked right in under the grass. So really excited to develop that work next year. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. So I think that might be my last slide, just about. And at this point, I just wanted to say that, yeah, so we've had a mixed bag for the seabirds. As I say, the kittiwakes and terns and a lot of the gulls, not a great season, although the lesser blackback gulls, the productivity did look good this year. So they seem to have done very well, and they've been quite stable there. And the really positive stuff is the burrow nesters and that impact of rat removal, which is one of those really key management activities that we can do for seabirds across Scilly. So I think we're going to have, that's it for me at this point. I think we're going to have questions all together at the end. So I will hand back to Scott at this point. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you for that, Vickie. Yeah, it's a real success story for Scilly for breeding birds in recent years. For some, well, most species anyway. However, it's been an absolute pleasure to be doing a bit of work with Vickie and going out and doing some seabird surveys with her. And long may the seabird work continue. So I think we're going to hand over to Jaclyn now, and she's going to give us a talk on biosecurity and the seabird recovery project that's was undertaken on St Agnes, and future work that we've done on Scilly. So handing over to you, Jaclyn.
Sorry, everybody. I'll try that again. Here we go. It's the good fun of being the host. So in theory, the camera now will change and go back to myself instead of Scott on the screen, but it might not do. So I'll just do this. Aha, that might work. Okay, I'll just move my camera. And if Vickie, can you give me a thumbs up? Are you seeing the screen and my face? Yay! Okay, so thank you very much, Vickie. What Vickie does is the awesome bit of monitoring these amazing seabirds. And what I'm now about to do is kind of bookend that by going to the past of how we did the rodent eradication, the removal of the rats. And then I'm going to leap to the future, what that might mean looking to the islands elsewhere, why we did this project and what we could do next if there's a will. And then we actually then leap towards, let's get this here, what's happening now. So this is where it comes into biosecurity for life. So that's my role at the moment. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be really cheesy with the joke that is, I wear many different hats. So for example, right now, this is the current one, the biosecurity for life. If you see me working, that's probably what you'll see in the current days. But if we go back to the rodent eradication project, you probably would have seen me in this one in the summer and this one in the winter. And I still wear these now, so farmers know why I'm on their land. So I don't even suit hats, but I seem to have a few when it comes to the Isles of Scilly. But yeah, this is the Isles of Scilly Seabird Recovery Project. We did it in 2013 to 2017. I was a project manager and the beneficiaries were the Manx shearwaters and the storm petrels. It wasn't just the birds though, the Scilly shrews did well as well. So for those of you who visit or live here, you probably feel the same, that we have an affiliation with our shrews. This is the lesser white-tooth shrew. And once the rats were removed, they did better because rats predated them. So the project, we designed this logo. It was a sense of place, that's St Agnes Lighthouse, sense of people. We went for what looks like a woman and a child, and a sense of the species, the Manx shearwater, does look like an albatross. And it was a great partnership project. So the Wildlife Trust, RSPB, Isles of Scilly, AOMB, Natural England, Duchy of Cornwall. And we were funded through LIFE, Heritage Lottery Fund, and also donations from the Isles of Scilly Bird Group. It was all about, in those early days, of, okay, if we're going to do this project, this is about the community. And at the heart of the community is the school. So back in 2015, when we were looking into, 2012, when we were starting the project, we started with the community to say, is this a project you'd like? And how do we go about it? So this school, for example, knows more about shrews than probably anybody else anywhere, any other school. But it was all about community and visitors. So I know a lot of you on the call tonight are probably lifelong visitors, lovers of the island, come over bird watching. You're important too. I mean, we wanted this to be about the visitors and the community of Scilly. So this was the project supervisor. This is Paul St Pierre. He's the conservation officer for RSPB based in Cornwall. Now, when it comes to rat eradication projects, it's all about reducing alternative food sources and alternative harbourage materials for rodents. And what that means is when you have a population of people, we have these kind of areas, which adds challenge to the project. So it's about getting the islands rat removal ready. And what does that really mean? Well, what it means is we looked around the island and went, okay, what could rodents hide in and what could they eat? And so you can see that we did a clear out of the sheds, and we also looked at alternative food sources. St Agnes has a lot of apples, a lot of orchards, and if there's an apple on the ground, the rat might eat that instead of the bait that we put out. So huge preparation work. The school still does apple day every day. They're very excited by their apples and making juice. And this slide, what it shows is, this isn't actually a picture of the cow, it's the background I'm more interested in. I see islands very different to probably everybody else. I see them now as a place where rats can be and what we need to do to remove them. So there you can see there's some hay on a pallet. And that was about, yeah, if you've got high risk harbourage items, I want you to pop it on a pallet so we can get bait stations underneath. And then on the right hand side, there's a classic Scilly shed. I do have permission to use that photograph. I've done a lot of projects now. When people say my shed's messy, I say I don't think anything can surprise me anymore. So this one here, we cleared out and he found tools that he hadn't seen for 30 years. But as you can see, if we have that amount of harbourage, we can't get the bait stations in, we can't look for signs of rodents, the last survivors, we need to clear those areas. So we had a big bonfire night to celebrate the start of the project, getting rid of that rat harbourage. We also got rodent-proof bins. So it's all about making sure rats can't get to that food waste. And then this is the biggest thing that we just thank the community for. How we do this operation requires we need to get rodenticide into bait stations inside properties. That's access to get inside every few days to check the bait. That is a huge thing that the community allowed us to do, give that access and worked with us. So we began the baiting. So we're now in we're in 2013, 8th of November, we get the team together. These are the buckets full of rodenticide and we start the operation. This is the team. This is what the bait stations look like. We are minimising the impact of non-target species. So on the left-hand side, you've got a piece of agricultural pipe, wires either end to prevent rabbits coming in. It's got a crow clip on top, and what that clip means is that crows, corvids are very intelligent. They can't get it off, but we can move that clip, replace the bait, pop that back on, and the bait's wired inside, so other non-targets can't take it away. And there's a bamboo cane and some flag and tape to find it. On the right-hand side, it's a lockable bait station to protect non-targets, children, pets. And that's what's around people's gardens and inside their homes. And it's the blue rodenticide inside. So these maps now are just going to show you bait take. So on the 9th of November, the team went out and they recorded how many of those blocks have been taken overnight, because rodents are often nocturnal. And then we record that in a GIS linked database. We need to know exactly where the bait's been taken from so we can hone in on the survivors and plan accordingly. So the darker the spot, the more bait take, up to 6 blocks of bait. So 10th of November, you can see it's increasing the bait take. 11th, increasing again. 12th of November. 13th of November. 15th of November. 16th, we can see a real drop off. 17th, look down at the bottom at Wingletang. 18th. 19th. I always think this is the bit now where you've got the subordinate individuals, the alpha individuals have taken the bait and obviously succumbed to it underground in their dens, but now the subordinates are coming out and taking that bait, so you've got a little bit of an increase. 20th of November, look over on Gew, bit of sign over there, 22nd. And then on the 30th of November, this was our last sign of rats, but we didn't know that at the time. You have to keep baiting for a 6-month period to be able to prove that negative and to make sure you've got every individual, and you can only do it in winter when there's not the other food sources around, such as seabirds. But that was our last sign. We were absolutely delighted that it only happened. It only took 3.5 weeks. And this map's quite interesting because look at the amount of bait that's red. That's what the most amount of bait take is, the red colour, and it's around the coastlines. Look at Gew, where all Vickie seabirds are. Look at that. It just shows what these rodents are feeding on. So then it's about, okay, we've done it. we think we've done it. We've now got to wait 2 years to declare rat-free success. So let's do intensive monitoring. Let's keep our eyes out. Let's do our rat on a rat campaign. So people who live there or you visit, you'll probably see the stickers all over the place. Please let us know if you ever see anything that you think suspicious of a rat. And so, yeah, it's training. This is the Wildlife Trust and the volunteers to understand how they're going to take on the legacy of monitoring. This is one of our youngest volunteers. He actually got a Blue Peter badge for this work. When I was his age, I never got a Blue Peter badge and I was constantly submitting. We also did Vickie's full SPA survey. So this is the team landing on Round Island. So we were very busy for those 2 years, waiting to see if we'd got the rat-free success, and we did. So Biz Bell is I don't know if you can see my mouse, but she's in the blue t-shirt here. She is from Wildlife Management International Limited. She's a contractor. She's from a big family of Bells, and they know how to remove rodents from New Zealand. So she came back and she did some monitoring to check that we were indeed rat-free. So we had a celebration event like we're graduating with our hats. And the community, we basically had what we call a rat-free party. Did I miss that one? There we go, all out on the field. And then this is it now, this is the legacy. This is where the community of St Agnes are the most important thing. They are now carrying out these checks. This to us is what nightmares are made of. This is mouse teeth marks on a piece of chocolate wax. Every month they go and check their 10 or so boxes, which used to have bait in, but it's now non-toxic chocolate wax. Rats are quite predictable. They get to the island, they want to find a mate and something delicious to eat. A dark corner in a box with some chocolate wax that's very flavoursome. They should nibble it, leave teeth marks, and we can detect it. So that's what, as I say, we don't want to find on all of our checks. So absolutely delighted that the birds did indeed return. So this is the first chick. We said in living memory. We didn't know if it was 100 years. It's a long time. But yeah, I mean, I'm obviously delighted. I'm not sure if the chicks as delighted as me. Now, just looking to the future, when you look at this map, this is your 500-metre buffer from mean low water. It's clear that down to St Agnes and Kew and the Western Isles, that yes, they connect, a rodent can actually, I mean, they can swim 1.8 kilometres, but they can wade for 3 days. They can stay alive a long time in water. And when we've got those low tides on Scilly, rats can simply walk between islands. But over in the west, we've got that deep water channel, St Mary Sound. So the likelihood of a rat getting back isn't going to be through swimming. It's certainly not going to be through walking between islands, because that doesn't happen. It's going to be through boats and biosecurity. But let's look at the other islands. When people say, so what about the rest of the islands? Well, we have to take them as a whole. This mean low water, they become connected. So essentially they become one island. Now, St Mary's, we have too much alternative food source for rodents. So everything I was saying about before, with our waste management, it's just not going to be possible. With 1,500 people that live here, not possible. So what you can really see is this bit here, we need to think about if we do future islands, if there's an aspiration with the partnership, let's make sure there's biosecurity from St Mary's, but we would have to do them all together. So that's the future, but what about the now? Just going back, sorry, I forgot I wasn't going to do the now. This is now about Lundy. Now, David Price is on this call, and I didn't ask permission to use his amazing slides. I tried to at the start, he didn't respond. I'm going to take his silence as that's absolutely fine. So David, if you're watching, thank you for this. So this is going back now. This has been 20 years since the removal of rats on Lundy. So we learnt from their project for here on Scilly, and we continue to learn. So what you're going to see now is, what does that look like? How have the seabirds responded? And what do Vickie's graphs potentially, what are they going to look like in the future? So this project happened. I know David Appleton's on the call, Natural England, RSPB, Landmark Trust. I'm sure you're all aware of where Lundy is in the Bristol Channel. So about Lundy, a few facts here. Oh, where's my slide? Yep, so we're in North Devon. Triple SSI, it has a farm, a shop. It doesn't have a community as such. It has people that work for the Landmark Trust. So in that way, it's different to St Agnes for its stakeholders. Now, before the removal of the rats, it had your 10 species of breeding seabirds. It was brown and black rats that were removed. Your Manx shearwaters were really down, 300 pairs, and your puffins had nearly gone, 13 birds. Storm petrels were absent. So seabirds are declining, same story for St Agnes and Kew. There was a need. So yeah, this is how they did it. So again, it's both of the black and the brown rats that were removed. The aim to increase Manx otters and puffins, eradicate those rats. As I say, we're going back to 2002, 2003, 2004. There was no GIS linked databases then, so they used pieces of paper sellotaped together. The brain boggles how we've moved on. So, but it's the same methodology. Look at those agricultural pieces of pipe, the stations every 50 meters, because that's the territory of a rat. And they indeed did get the rat-free status in 2006. And the response, woo, similar to St Agnes and Gew. So this was the first Manx otter chick in 45 years. So that was in 2004. So these are David and Helen Booker. Helen Booker is from the RSPB. David Booker is an RSPB volunteer. And these are now the graphs that they helped us to give a presentation on St Agnes. So thank you, David. So here we go, Manx otters. Look at the graph, 310 birds, rat eradication happens, up we go, 1,000, way, 3,000, 5,000. We like that graph. And then here, earlier on, I showed you a graph of the rats taking bait. We've got the opposite now. We've got on Lundy, we've got the Manx otters increasing. So here we've got the occupied burrows, which Vickie was explaining the methodology of the callback to that tape over the years. So 2008, 2013, 2017, 18, you can start to see that increase, and those big red dots are over 100 birds. Of course, it's the nest boxes and the ringing and the work that we can now look towards doing on St Agnes and Gew as the numbers have increased. And then in October, they got their storm petrels back, just like we did on Scilly. I'm not competitive, but we got our storm petrels back sooner than Lundy. So now they've got at least 4 breeding locations of about 40 pairs of storm petrels. So wonderful news. What about the other seabirds? Puffins. I mean, obviously, I'm shamefully wearing my puffin jumper. Who doesn't like puffins? Everybody loves puffins. So the numbers, in 1939, there was a survey done by Richard Perry. So we've got some data going back. We've then got the Lundy Field Society. We've got those partial estimated figures. We're going right down, right down. And then when we get, I mean, look at that. Ooh, that was going the wrong direction. So in 1979, maybe 130. Now in 1981, the first standard whole island survey was done. So this is David Price and colleagues. And you can see they were declining down to those 13 puffins. Rat eradication happened. And what do we get? Here goes, just 5 birds, 2004 survey, they were hanging on. David says that they just didn't know if they were going to come back. And then, oh, they are bringing food back. What does that mean? Woo, chicks. So it was great news in July 2005. Yeah, the first puffin chick recorded in 30 years. So look at this again, this graph, it's just what recovery graph should look like, rat-free, and now we increase. And I helped to join this survey in 2021, well, just last June. And yeah, we've seen that sharp increase. It is really working. It's very different to St Agnes. If any of you have been to Lundy, then you know what it's like. I came back a lot fitter. I think was about half a stone lighter, just because of all the walking up and down. So with Paul St Pierre, the project supervisor for Scilly, we had a whale of a time because we could see the potential and what can happen once the rodents are removed. So we had to count every bird. It's pretty hard work. I never understood what Vickie had to do. You have to be really patient. So yeah, I mean, just look at this cliff here. David zooms in and there you go. Huh. You know, it's hundreds of birds in one little area. If you get distracted, you have to start again. So the guillemots, how have they fared with the project? Well, again, it's not a burrow nesting bird, it's a cliff nesting bird. We've got these numbers and just incredible that the response, the average was 2,200. So there's your 2004 survey. We're now rat-free and look what's happening again. So 2021, 9,000. It's probably a bit more than that now, but a mind-blowing difference in your guillemots. This is good. I didn't realise David had done this. This is myself and Paul to give you context of the cliffs and the available territory for these birds. For an idea of scale, you can just see we're in that circle, zoom in, there we are. There we are. It's a good job I wasn't picking my nose at that moment. And so this is Jenny Cove, and this is where there's huge potential for the birds. I mean, just look at this area here where you've got one of the cliff areas, a traditional guillemot site, and then, whoa, yeah, looking in, getting your scope out. These areas have been colonised. This is happening since the removal of rats. And just look at the numbers. It's quite incredible. Razorbills, same story. We've got this average about 900. And then we have that eradication. And the numbers go up. We're now at over 3,000. And again, let's look at where those birds are. A little crevice here. Let's zoom on in. Oh, under here. There we go. So there, no more rats. Yeah, more guillemots and razorbills. Perhaps. Now, what about gulls? Vickie's been talking about today. I'm afraid it's not the case for these. And there's so much going on with gulls right now. It's not just about the rodents on islands and the predation of their chicks, but it's about how they're faring in general out at sea and the status they deserve and the conservation effort that's required. Any other effects? Yeah, they also have a shrew, the Lundy shrew, house sparrows, starlings, water rails, and wheatears breeding. I'm hoping for the same on St Agnes with those wheatears. And so that assemblage, let's just look at the overall graph, rat removal, that average of 6,300 birds. And now that's probably a bit higher, over 27,000. Just incredible. So that's going to be, I mean, obviously it's different for St Agnes and Gee with the habitat, and I hope I've got that across with the cliffs, but we're on that trajectory, and it's called the species recovery curve. So with biosecurity, which is in the now, how do we protect these islands? Well, Lundy's got a farm, it brings in high risk freight items, feed and hay. It's also got the boat that comes over, this is the Oldenburg. It's got pleasure boats or boats that are diving and dripper boats. It's got a helicopter. So these are what we call the biosecurity pathways where a rodent can come back. So in part of my role as biosecurity officer for Scilly and Lundy, we're just helping to revise that plan, take a look at where some gaps are, do a little extra training. And this year I was fortunate enough to meet the warden out there, Dean, learn some ideas. This is me being amazed that copper tape stops slugs going into permanent monitoring stations because slugs are really annoying on our chocolate wax. So that's my sheer delight. Who else could get so delighted by copper tape and monitoring boxes? But that's what happens in our biosecurity world. And this is a very happy lot of faces. As I say, I hope David's still on the call. The reason we all look so happy that day is check out what happened. It was Britain's first sulphur-bellied warbler when we were on the island. So that was quite an impressive day. I was very impressed with the team that we still carried out a normal day's work when this was kicking around. It was only there for a couple of days and then left again. So that was you're an audience that would appreciate the excitement of that experience. And guess where it was found? By the bins. I have a reputation for taking pictures of bins and wanting to know they're rodent free. So of course this bird would be by the bins, and we've got a photo here to prove it. Now then, the next one I just want to talk about is the Life Raft project. So this now is the next stage. This is in Northern Ireland. This is a project to remove the rats and ferrets. And I've been assisting with this during lockdown with a few visits. So this project is RSPB and partners again. So Rathlin Community, Dara and Causeway Coastal Glens Heritage Trust. The title is Rathlin Acting for Tomorrow. We've deliberately done that because it's not just about seabirds anymore. It's about those socio-economic benefits. And so where's Rathlin? Yeah, you can just see there, it's right at the top of Northern Ireland. It's like an L-shaped island. This is a gorgeous golden hair that you get there. So here's the partnership and the stakeholders have been involved. We managed to get the last bit of life funding, quite incredible, which is the EU funding source. And again, it's Heritage Lottery Fund and funding from DARA. Same problem, brown rats, but ferrets as well. So any project I'm ever involved with, I think, here we go, great. And then there's a next add-on, which was why these projects get more and more progressive. This is a 2-species removal project. And so unfortunately, we all know what these predators are obviously doing, and the evidence is there. When the ferrets have got into the puffin colony, we've seen the outcomes of that. These are the birds, obviously the puffins that are really not doing well. They're obviously now vulnerable, they're not doing well at all. And when it comes to those Manxies, you can look at the map here, you can see they're missing. Look at that west coast where they are, where they should be. There's definitely not a red dot on Rathlin. They used to be there, they're not anymore. And same with the storm petrels, missing. And so this project is designed to bring them back. They've also got corncrake that have just recently returned, which is great news and very important. And the EU life funding, we're very excited about that. But obviously we all know that it's not great having those predators when it comes to their eggs and chicks. It's inhabited, hence the reason I was involved. So this is now the next project where there's a community. There's 150 people that live here on Rathlin. And what was great was when I first started to talk to them and they said, really, can it be done? And what's the results from it? I said, well, you have to look no further than Lundy. I can tell you everything about the Isles of Scilly one because I lived and breathed the project as the project manager for 5 years and we're on the trajectory, but look at what happened with the puffins for Lundy. And at the end of the day, everybody there agrees for the economy, puffins are important. So talking one-to-one with every householder, from the older residents on the island to the person who's got the most land and fears for the cliffs, and me saying I'm scared of heights, I wouldn't be the person working around the cliffs, they're the New Zealanders, to families, to the lighthouse keeper. At the bottom image there is the school, to engage with them with a 7-foot puffin, what better way to do that? So it was all about starting these conversations. So this was me this summer when COVID allowed me to travel there. So how will they do the project? Well, a PhD was done on the ferrets by Tom Bodie a number of years ago. He mapped out the territories. He feels he could have dispatched every individual, but his PhD was to monitor those territories and to say, yes, they're having an impact on the wildlife. So that'll be through trapping. And then it's the same old when it comes to the rodents. It's your agricultural pipe with your rodenticide every 50 metres. And that's what the grid will look like for Rathlin. It will be a large, intense project. Here's the Seabird Centre. If anybody's ever been, this is where the RSPB do interpretation for the birds. And at the moment, the breeding birds are mainly on the stacks away from the predators. So just imagine when the project is hopefully successful, seabirds returning and puffins been seen where they used to be seen when the older generation talk about stories of them being on the top of the hills. So coming back to where they used to be. And those socioeconomic benefits. The Isles of Scilly Seabird Recovery Project was the first project that said, oh, okay, there's wider outcomes than the wildlife. So on Scilly, we had Mike Hicks, who had to collect all those apples, turned it into apple juice with the school, turned it into cider, and then has his lovely gin business. I'm sure many of you have tasted the delights that are gin. He says that the project was a catalyst. Don't worry, this slide doesn't show me feeding gin to children and cattle. And then there's also John Peacock, who I think is on the call at the moment. He was able to do more interpretation. He's got a story to tell about the project, and he explained that it made a difference to his business, particularly after Countryfile came out and covered the story as well. So he's done more and more with his wildlife business. And then the local shop. This is the first time the shop broke even in wintertime. We weren't ordering online with Tesco. We were going to the shop and giving them the support while we were there. And the same thing will happen for Rathlin. So they're looking towards Scilly actually to say, how are you extending your visitor season and how can we do that around our birds? And guess what point we're starting with? We start at the end, how to stop the rats getting back through biosecurity. So these are just images with some of the boat people and stakeholders with colleague Tessa, who's from Biosecurity for Life, who covers Northern Ireland, to say, yeah, we've got to look at the long term of stopping them returning. If you don't do it, unfortunately, something can happen where the rats return, which takes me to the time I spent a couple of years ago on Lord Howe. So when I completed as project manager out here on Scilly, I then went and joined the Lord Howe team between 2017, 2019. Now, if anybody had heard about this project, it had been 17 years rumbling along with a lot of mistrust and yeah, I mean, straight away, I look at the title of it, Lord Howe Rodent Eradication Project. There's a lesson to be learnt there, isn't there? Go for the recovery, not the method for your title. So yeah, I headed out there believing that the community was more wanting the project than not, and what had gone wrong was now put correct. And this is a slide that I inherited from the project manager at the time. So this is what the island looks like. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Gorgeous. It's got the two large mountains over in the south end. This is where it is. It's between Australia and New Zealand. It's part of New South Wales, part of Australia. And it's a World Heritage Site, so 1,400 hectares, resident population of 380, tourists were limited to 400, so they'd won lots of awards for socio-ecotourism because there's not too many people that can stay there at any one time, and a permanent park preserve. It's actually quite interesting because it's one of the last islands to be discovered. So it was in 1788. Pigs and goats were introduced. It was actually settled in 1834, so one of the last islands to be settled, really. Cats were introduced, rats arrived on a shipwreck in 1918. There'd been extinctions, so 12 in total. This is birds and insects, so directly attributed to the rats and mice. Worth protecting for sure. It's an amazing place. I mean, the vascular plants, 44% of them are endemic, vegetation communities, 182 bird species. It is incredible. You know, it's like when you think about, when people say about Galapagos and the number of endemic species. So it's certainly worth doing the project to save these species. And the evidence was there, you know, what the rats and mice were doing, the taking of the eggs, the taking of the chicks, viable evidence. And for one, I was sick of picking up black-winged petrels that were half-eaten. There's no veterinary care on the island, and just thinking, oh, this long-lived bird, you know, let's do this project, let's reverse how it's going for this amazing species. And then there's a Lord Howe Island stick insect, which is an endemic. It's actually the world's rarest insect because it was rediscovered. They thought it had gone extinct from rat predation, but a bird had clearly dropped it on Bull's Pyramid. And that is the world's largest sea stack, which is 11 kilometres off the main island. So they were delighted to rediscover it, took it to Melbourne Zoo for captivity. And the idea is to reintroduce them to Lord Howe Island itself once the project's deemed a success. And so when I got there, the project was ready to go. They'd done this infographic and everything. They knew how many staff were going to be there, how many helicopters, how much bait, all ready to go. That was absolutely not the case. When I got there, I was only meant to be there for 6 months to do the delivery, but the community was still very divided. It was 50-50 about the project. So I went back. We went back a step and we went, right, let's re-engage with the community and talk about the methodology and what would be most appropriate. There hadn't really been talks like this until now. So I was like, well, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do collective talks and one-to-ones. The gentleman at the top here, he had lots of conversations with me over the time, and in the end he became one of my best employees doing the baiting. And the people down below, they've been waiting 18 years for this project, and they were absolutely delighted when it started to happen. So with the methodology of this, you've obviously heard twice now about how we've done the islands in the UK. Well, over in Australia and New Zealand, you can use helicopters, and you sure have to when you've got big mountains. So this map here just shows you the 3 methodologies that we used. Green means aerial distribution, and you can see on the bottom image here, it's a bucket that deflects out the pellets. It's done specifically, it's not just bait just thrown everywhere. You have to get a piece of bait in the territory of every mouse this time, which is every 10 metres. So that bait falls in the canopy where the rats and mice are, or it falls down to the ground. It's the only way to disperse it in those mountains and through that subtropical foliage. And then you have to have a buffer zone where the person at the bottom there is kind of reenacting a helicopter. We have these panniers either side of us, and we take the bait and put it on the ground. And that's in fields that aren't inhabited, but it's the buffer between the mountains with the helicopter and then the settlement with the houses. And in the settlement with the houses, it's very similar to Scilly and Lundy, where it's the lockable bait stations that you can see me pointing at the bait in the top slide. And then it protects pets and children. But what actually happened is when I got there, they were going to have hand broadcast in their gardens. People were clearly worried about that. And so we increased the number of bait stations to 26,000. It was a massive operation, absolutely huge. But it appeared to work. And when I departed from the island, I left them with a logo. Does that ring the bell? Rat on a rodent this time, because they've got mice as well. And instead of people power, biosecurity dog power. So a little bit of a similarity. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to that biosecurity, it has failed, which is why I'm so, today wanting to explain to you all the importance of biosecurity. So what they have is the ship comes every 3 weeks called the Island Trader. This is Sebi, the biosecurity dog that does inspections. but unfortunately a rat got through, and guess what? It's a pregnant female. So it's been a tough time for them. They were nearly at the 2-year status to declare rodent-free success. And then my colleague and friend called up to say, we had a rat last night, they chopped down the tree to get to it, there was 3 of them, and then they just had to keep following the incursion response. And this update, this was in July, 87 rodents removed, 35 adults, 50 juveniles, 2 to be confirmed, dog searches. It's a shame because the reason it's a shame, this was a £16 million project, and to protect that investment and to protect the work that's done, we made recommendations for the biosecurity. There was some gaps, and so obviously a rodent found the gap. The good news is that hopefully they have carried out a full incursion response. Since the 12th of August, there's been no more sign, so 95 rodents removed. And I mean, how they've had to do it's quite impressive, with all the dogs getting cordons and captures. The world's watching this because this is what we all fear, having an incursion and then making sure we can stop it. So time will tell. It's a disappointment after all the hard work, but it just shows this is what is important, everybody, biosecurity. So this is now the current project that's on Scilly, and where I'd like everybody's help who lives and visits the islands. So this project's called Biosecurity for Life. Yep, there's the funders, there's the partners, and these are the species. And some people look at this and go, cats, really? Who's moving cats accidentally on boats? There's more stories than you believe. Mink, hedgehogs, that's an interesting one, isn't it? That one divides everybody. As I say here on Scilly, let's just not take them to any of the other islands. That would be great. But yeah, stoats, and then obviously the rodents. These are the species that we're concerned about. So this project's across the UK. So my colleagues are elsewhere around the island. I'm covering Scilly and Lundy. So that's actually 42 island special protection area SPAs, which are designated for breeding birds. Here's a picture of the team. So at the top corner is Tom, he's the project manager. Laura and Karen are our biosecurity advisors. And then down the bottom here were the officers. And this one here, this is Holly, who used to be on the Seabird project here on Scilly. So she's done a big journey. She's up in Shetland right now. So she's doing all the community work that we have on Scilly up in Shetland, which is great. She's taken the lessons learned and working with the community up there, doing a great job. I just think it's brilliant because, well, we all have the wars here between birding of Shetland and Scilly, don't we? So Holly and I, we just work together. It's important seabirds wherever we go. So, and then the reason this project came about is, you may have heard of the Shant Isles Recovery Project. That was 2015-17. That's an uninhabited island, and that worked successfully. The seabirds have returned, but as part of that project, they looked at the biosecurity of the other SPAs in the UK and went, there's quite a few gaps, we should be doing better. So this project works with the communities, land managers to implement plans. We train personnel, so the boat operators, how to put out the monitoring. The picture I showed you earlier of the chocolate wax, this is now happening across more and more islands. We've just got our biosecurity dog, meet Jinx. This was a couple of days ago. We cannot wait to meet Jinx, lively Cocker Spaniel. It's going to be our the UK's first rodent rat detection dog. So we cannot wait to send Jinx to islands. It's going to be great. So for example, now on St Agnes, in theory, if we've got a big scare, bring in Jinx. He will sniff it out. We've got a network of hubs equipped. So on Scilly, we have people in Exeter trained to come and assist if we get a rodent back. We've also got the Wildlife Trust out here and other volunteers, so it'll be hands-on to do that incursion response. We've got the interpretation materials, so you'll see this more and more at the moment here on Scilly and elsewhere. So, you know, posters, we've got the biosecurity leaflet, we've got this sticker for kayaks. This is an example of the leaflet for the boatman. So the actions you'll see on here for you is like down here, your luggage. Before boarding, check your bags, never leave it on a harbour side, make sure your cargo is rodent proof. And then the boatmen are trained on looking for signs of rodents, using rat rope guards as a wish that we really want to get going on Scilly. And these posters are going up around the UK. So I assume a lot of you that are on the call like islands, and what the dream is you'll go between islands and you'll see this theme over and over and go, oh, look, it's another biosecurity for life sign. We now know we can't take rodents here because it is rodent free already. Or if it's not rodent free, we don't want any new ones. So yeah, here on Scilly, beloved boatman here, Joe Badcock, taking one of my leaflets. And then we've got the Arthur Steamship Company. And this is actually a volunteer who's just been out. I don't know which jobs he preferred. I don't know if he preferred helping me painting the incursion shed or helping Vickie to do Manx shearwater surveys. I can't possibly imagine it's not the shed, but we have volunteers come out every year and help us with the equipment. This is over on Tresco the other day. This is working with people on Tresco because they send some items over to St Agnes. So it's a case of saying, okay, let's make sure they're rodent free and looking towards the future. If there's an aspiration to remove rodents, then we need to be getting better at not moving rodents between islands. And this is the youngest audience, St Mary's School. They always impress me. They know so much already. And then here on this slide, here's Scott's little one, and Darren, who's on the call, who's the ranger, his little one as well. And would you believe it? Both of them knew quite a bit about biosecurity. So well done, dads, that are clearly passing on messages. Maybe it isn't the dads, maybe they just know. So for everybody here tonight, I'd really like you to take away some actions. If you're traveling to an island, how you can help. Check your baggage for stowaways. I know people laugh at me and go, really? But it does happen. Store food in mouse-proof containers. The next one's really if you operate a vessel, looking for signs. If you're transporting bulky items, check them for stowaways. Don't store them where invasive predators are beforehand. Pack your food in the day of travel is always a good one. If you see a stowaway, never throw it overboard because they can swim. That's a big one. Some people say, oh yeah, I just chucked it overboard. Don't do that. Try and dispatch it. Report invasive sightings and always dispose of your rubbish and waste responsibly. And that just brings me to the end of my PowerPoint. This is the website for anybody who wants to find out more. I thank you for being, when you're on Scilly or visiting, for carrying out biosecurity actions. And thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to Scott.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jaclyn. It was lovely to see a picture of Orkney and Brodie there, both mine and Darren's little boys. And I think Darren will agree with me in that we actually learn quite a lot from our little ones. The two of them, I think, teach us quite a lot as well as us teaching them. So yeah, it's lovely of you to visit the school and pass on the message you just told to all of us. I think we'll all agree that seabird conservation on Scilly and the restoration project on St Agnes is a huge part of wildlife conservation on Scilly as a whole, and something that the community are really passionate about. And Jaclyn in particular plays a huge part in that, and engaging the people into supporting these projects and getting on board. And the work she did on St Agnes was incredible. And looking forward, I hope that, and I think everybody will agree with me, that she can have the same impact on the rest of the islands when the time comes to continue the seabird recovery across Scilly. And again with Vickie, the consistency and the amount of work that she puts into seabird recording on a yearly basis is amazing. And as I said earlier, I've been lucky enough to join her for a bit of that, but she's absolutely fantastic, and the work that goes into it is really impressive. Seabirds are a huge part of Scilly birding, and that's growing, and especially with the popularity of Scilly pelagics growing year on year. And obviously people come down to see the migrant seabirds that are coming to Scilly on a yearly basis, but the breeding seabirds on Scilly are the lifeblood of that seabirding on Scilly. And just to give some context, in recent years, only in sort of 5-10 years ago, the seabird pelagics going out, if they were seeing flocks of 20, 30, 40 Manx shearwaters, that was a notable sighting. That was something that it was nice to see. And this year just gone, towards the back end of the pelagic season, we went out on it was the final Monday night of the pelagic season, and we recorded an estimated number of 10,000 Manx shearwaters in Selonian waters, and that's you know, I'm not that they will have been birds from Lundy, from Scilly, but I think it's testament to the impact these restoration projects have had in the southwest, and I think we will continue to see those increases in numbers as the years goes on, and as these projects continue to progress. So thank you so much to Jaclyn and to Vickie and to the Outer Scilly Wildlife Trust, to the RSPB, and to the work that the bird group put in as well, from a voluntary point of view, from seabird monitoring and from surveys and for recording numbers of seabirds around Scilly. We're going to go on to a question and answer session now. If any of you that are viewing would like to answer any questions, to ask any questions, sorry, if you can just make sure that you unmute yourselves, you put your cameras on if you wish to, and if questions can go directly to Vickie and Jaclyn, or myself and Julian if you're really desperate, but I think the majority of the questions will be for Vickie and Jaclyn. So if I don't know the best way of doing this, but if you speak up, and if we can hear you, then ask the question, and obviously if you can just make sure that Jaclyn or Vickie can hear you, and hopefully they'll respond to your questions. So if any questions, if anyone would like to go ahead.
I'm just saying there's actually some questions in the chat.
Oh, is there? Brilliant.
Yeah, if people want to put questions in the chat as well, that's another way of doing it. But we've got one here from Trish on St Agnes, and she says the Fulmar chicks failed this year on Santa Warner, and I wondered how they were doing overall. So Trish is one of our champions, which has been great, because they're doing well in general. Fulmars have been declining across the southwest, but we've been doing okay on Scilly. We've still got reasonable numbers, about 300 pairs across Scilly, and there's a few try each year on Santa Warner. But yeah, as Trish said, they didn't do well this year. They did okay. So the fulmars that I didn't actually put the slide in my talk, but I do monitor fulmars over on Menawethan in the Eastern Isles and the Daymark on St Martin's, and they did okay there. So a reasonable success. Fulmars are very long-lived birds. They're living 50 years, 60 years, so they can cope with reasonably low success as long as they're getting a chick. They only, between the pair, they'll need to get 2 chicks off in their lifetime to replace themselves in the next generation. But this year it's unfortunate they didn't do so well on Santa Warner. I don't, like I say, that they did okay in other sites. So hopefully next year we'll see more success there for the next Kevin or Kavina, whoever it is that we see next year on those things. But I'm delighted. I love that you keep in touch with them all, Trish, for me. That's really helpful and brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone else on the call that would like to ask any questions?
Looks like David Smith has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for 2 really interesting presentations from both of you. I hope you can hear me out. I had a question going back to the to Vickie's presentation. In fact, the very beginning of it. 2 questions really. I think your first slide had the overall number of breeding pairs on the islands, and it went up from 69, peaked in 83 and came down. So I was just wondering, was there any lessons learnt for Scilly particularly on why it went up and then why it came down, or were these wider factors which were taken into account and Scilly was just a consequence of that? And a sort of slightly similar question on the next slide, I think, which was comparing the breeding success of the gulls in Hugh Town and Samson. Is there any thought as to why it was so they were so much more successful in Hewtown rather than Sampson?
Great, thank you. So yeah, the first question, the numbers. So because it sort of includes so many different species, and we've seen even just from this year, you've got some that are plummeting, the terns and the common, the kittiwakes, and then the auks in particular are doing well in general, and the Manx shearwaters. It's hard to sort of pinpoint a lot of those things, but certainly since 83, the decline has been due to the gulls in particular. That's what's really happening there. And when it comes to reasons, there's so many, but it does. Food supply seems to be the base of most of those issues for the gulls and the terns, which could be related to climate change if they're finding it harder to find the food. If there's the water's warm, the fish are deeper. So some of these birds, like the tern and kittiwakes, are feeding in the surface waters if the fish aren't there, but the auks still seem to be able to get to them. That's possibly one of the reasons there. But going on to the next question, the gulls in Hewtown versus Sampson, yeah, I think almost certainly those birds that are in town, so it's still only about 20 pairs. That's been reasonably stable. It's only about 20 years actually they've been breeding in town, but I think those birds will be very much making use of those anthropogenic, is that the right word? Anthropogenic food sources, so basically rubbish and that sort of thing. And I think the birds that we're seeing on Sampson are more natural in their food sources, and that's where you're sort of finding that they're not getting the food they need for their chicks the same way. It may be that there are a few more chicks than I find on Sampson. That's really a limitation of my looking for them. I'll sort of do a view across as I approach the nesting beaches, and then as I sort of walk into them, of course, the alarm goes up and the chicks will hide. So I sort of get the best count of how many I can encounter. I'm hoping that with the drone work, particularly with the new drone, we can go higher and hopefully get some good views of these birds before when they're actually hanging out and not worried. We might get a better idea again of what's going on there next year. Thank you.
That's great, thank you, Vickie. There may be more questions. I've just got one actually, more towards Jaclyn. Obviously, the restoration projects are massively beneficial to the seabirds. On other projects away from Scilly, has there been any evidence of the rodent eradications having a positive impact on ground nesting passerines on the islands, or has any work been done on that? Not currently aware of anything on St Agnes and Goo at the moment in terms of numbers. Probably the project, there's not been enough time since the success of the project yet to really monitor that, but or the work hasn't been done yet. But is there any evidence on in other locations where it's shown an increase in population of ground nesting passerines, or even potentially waders in some locations after the project has taken place, as well as benefiting the seabirds?
Yeah, sure is. So there's been over 900 of these projects been done worldwide. That's 900. When people say to me this is new science, I'm like, yeah, in New Zealand there's been a lot of work, and there's definitely evidence of passerines out there. So yeah, there's numerous examples I could give you, and one of them would be off Stewart Island with the robin there that's just come on leaps and bounds. Here though, closer to home, Lundy. So I showed a slide where there was the shrew, but then you had your sparrows, your starlings, and the wheatears. And the reason I hold on to that wheatear one is every year, I think now the rats have gone, with the amount of migrant northern wheatears we get through, could the same happen for Scilly? Now, regarding the recording of it, when we did the Scilly project, we did have a contract with Spalding Associates who did monitoring for invertebrates, land birds, waders were included in that as well, rabbits and vegetation. But the honest truth is you need a large budget and you need to keep going those years after, and we just didn't have that. So this is what we're trying to build into projects moving forward. So on Rathlin, we've got a PhD that's about to come out from Queen's University for somebody to do that exact thing, where they do a year before and then they do afterwards. Maybe that'll turn into more PhDs, because we need that science here in the UK. And the main reason we need it, people like me that put the funding bids together, that try and get the funding, we need that tangible evidence to make our case so that we can draw down the funding. So on Rathlin, we just got the 4.5 million. And the question that Scott just asked me was exactly what they were asking me. And I need to be able to give them that data and say, this is what happened on Monday. Don't have all the facts on Scilly, but we need to get stronger at providing that evidence. I will say on St Agnes, the community are always telling me anecdotally, things are nesting more. I've got a blackbird in my wall now. I never used to see that. It's really low down. And we say, it's going to make a difference not having these predators.
Awesome. Brilliant. That's exactly the answer I was looking for. Thank you. Is there any other questions from anyone else? That's
there's one in the chat bar, which it might be that Vickie wants to take. Is the Scilly climate changing? Would this affect, for example, the decline in kittiwakes?
Yeah, so we're seeing effects of climate change as anywhere else in the UK, really. And one of the things that I think is probably one of the ways that it's affecting things like kittiwakes and their food supply is increased storminess. And you've got this there's some data came out from Plymouth where they're looking at the mixing of the warm and cold water, which happens as the currents come up off the continental shelf to places like Scilly. And you've got that mixing, and that's where the nutrients are brought up, and then you get the phytoplankton, then you get the fish, you get all the food for the birds. And you need quite stable weather in the spring when that food needs to be there predictably for the birds. And if you're getting more storms in the spring, it's actually mixing that up more, and it's just meaning that the food isn't predictable anymore. And so I think that's one of those key ways that could be affecting that food supply. And certainly for the kittiwakes in the years when they have bred recently, they have fledged chicks a couple of years, but recently as well, they've got to the point where they've laid the eggs and the chicks have hatched, but the chicks just haven't grown. They've been small for longer, and then the parents are away longer, and then you get a secondary effect of predation, because the parents are just not able to. They're both away feeding, trying to find the food, and the chicks are vulnerable to predation. And as the numbers get lower, of course, as well, you don't have that large number of the collective defence of a larger colony. So I think climate change is almost certainly at the base of quite a few of those problems, definitely. But yeah, I've actually got a direct question as well, saying, where was my direct message? Feral cats are mentioned as a potential problem. Are domestic cats a problem for birds on Scilly? Yeah, I'll pass this to Jaclyn as well. But yeah, cats are a problem to birds the world around, and we have had an issue with some cat predation of the storm petrels on St Agnes since the rat removal, and that was on Gew as well this year. We're working with the community to address this, because obviously these they could be feral cats potentially, but also pet cats, and it's really just about wearing collars and bells and working with the community to address issues. I don't know if you wanted to add any more to that, Jaclyn.
Yeah, just the fact that we're having in the RSPB, because obviously I'm directly employed, we're starting to take a stronger stance on it, because there is absolute tangible evidence of what pet cats do. Now, as a cat owner myself for numerous years, at one stage when I started the Seabird Recovery Project, I hid the fact I had a cat because I didn't know what that would mean for my reputation. Next to me at the moment is the neighbour's cat, because I clearly just give off good cat vibes. So I'm one of these people that understands that there's different values and concerns around being a cat owner and a pet owner, but what that might look like to wildlife. And it's never particularly great. So I try and advocate good cat pet ownership. Just to say with Rathlin, they do have feral cats. And so we've had to look at that very seriously, because those cats will most likely go into the ferret traps. A decision needs to be made, but what needs to happen is that needs to be community led. So like Vickie just said with here on St Agnes, when we have troublesome cats, it's about not dividing people, not getting angry, but working together to find those solutions. I did though share a post on social media just the other day. I am waiting for my cat lover friends to go, because in New Zealand, the laws have just been passed to keep cats indoors. I don't think we're quite ready for that in the UK. My sisters certainly won't be, because we have this freedom to roam, which down the line we may be able to work on more to say, what can we do to prevent this more and more? But cats certainly have a huge impact on native wildlife, particularly our songbirds. But as I say, being a cat owner, hold my hand up to it. It's about how we can do better ourselves. If you want to talk to me more about it, I find it's better to do it off these communal calls, and we can do it one-to-one.
Right, thank you, Jaclyn. Couple more questions. Penny Rogers, anecdotally, there seems to be fewer song thrushes over the last couple of years. True? If so, why? I don't know if it's quite subjective. From a birder's perspective, I'm not sure the exact numbers. I've not got a silly annual review in front of me to see what sort of numbers we were recording in song thrushes the last couple of years. I've not particularly noticed any massive change, and a lot of that could be more due to weather conditions, food availability. I do think last year in particular, song thrushes did have quite a good year on Scilly, so it's probably a bit too early to be sort of putting that down to anything related to rat predation, although that will no doubt be an issue on Scilly, but something that has been an issue for some time with regards to our breeding thrushes. So yeah, it's something that maybe needs to be kept a close eye on over coming years in terms of the breeding success of song thrushes on Scilly. Obviously, the song thrushes have experienced and are experiencing a national decline, and quite a steep decline. I think Scilly does have somewhat of a stronghold of song thrushes. In terms of the concentration of birds per landmass that we have here is quite incredible, and long may that continue, but it's something that will be somewhat of a focus in coming years to monitor those numbers. Just looking at other questions that we've got. Rob Lambert, sustainable tourism is the fastest growing sector of the tourism industry. Seabird ecotourism economic impacts are well documented around the UK, but can surely be developed and researched here. Do we agree? Yeah, I agree that yes, seabird ecotourism is both in terms of the Scilly pelagics that we see here, which are largely focused on migratory seabirds and those rarities that we want to see on Scilly, and that Scilly is famous for, that people spend a lot of money to come down here for. But as I said, the breeding seabirds are the lifeblood of that, and in terms of the numbers that we're seeing, the breeding seabirds are massively important. And I don't know if are you on the call, Rob? Are you there? No, I can't hear Rob. But I think in terms of the ecotourism around seabirds, in terms of the number of trips that are going out to view these seabirds, yes, maybe there is some research that can be done on the impacts of that. I think at the moment, with the growing number of breeding seabirds on Scilly, and the improvement of the environment that we're giving these seabirds is the main focus. And if we can get people on board and get people enthused by seabirds on Scilly, that's and especially the community, then I think that's a massive focus of getting people on board to help these projects move forward. Are you there? Sorry, let me close that. Are you there, Jaclyn?
Yeah, just to say as well, I'll send Rob a report. We had a master's student looking into this on Rathlin. What is the cost of a puffin? What does it bring into the islands? On Scilly, we used to call it our puff-ons report. I had too much to do. I couldn't work out the cost of a puffin. So with Rathlin, we've got a master's student from Queen's University to do a report for us. I'll forward it to you, Rob, because I think you might think it's quite interesting reading. And it's certainly something I think we need to look into more here. Again, if we can capture this kind of data, it makes it a lot easier for people going for funding for conservation if we can explain why the need is not just for the birds themselves, but for the community and the people living there. So I'll forward that on to you, Rob.
Can you hear me, Jaclyn? Can you hear me, Jaclyn?
I can hear you, Rob.
Yeah, I found my mic now, Scott. Yeah, that's the key point. I mean, as you know, I'm an academic based in the social sciences and the humanities, and the ecological arguments you're making are incredibly powerful, but they also must sit alongside the socio and economic arguments, and if you like, the cultural arguments. And when you look around Britain, I think a lot of places have developed very, very rich seabird ecotourism experiences, and I think there's real opportunities on Scilly for us to develop that, and also to report back on sort of, you know, bums on beds, and how many people come in the summer to see the seabirds, and how many people are going on the boats, and what's that contributing to the local economy. And the RSPB economics department should, you know, this perfect research for them to do, because as you say, it adds an extra string to the bow of conservation projects.
Here.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, in terms of the, I think again, I've mentioned a couple of times the summer pelagics are well known and are well advertised, and people come here for that reason. But I do think in terms of the breeding seabirds, honestly, you may agree or disagree with me, Rob, but it seems that with the breeding seabirds and our seabird assemblage around Scilly, that it is the attention that they get from the tourism industry is just a bit coincidental, and a bit about, you know, people that are here, they're here on holiday, and they see a boat trip advertised to go out and see some puffins, and they hop on board. They're not coming here specifically for Scilly's breeding seabirds. The people that are specifically coming here for seabirds are the real pelagic birders. They want to see Wilson stone petrel and great and Corey shearwater, and so I do think there is that opportunity there to really further promote the work that Jaclyn's done, and the work that Vickie has done and is doing, and the future work that Jaclyn will be doing, hopefully, and really make that a focus, and for people to want to come here for Scilly's breeding seabirds as well as the migratory seabirds. And I think that is something that we should explore and push in the future. And hopefully you agree with that.
Scott, if I could, it's John here, if I could just come in here, if I may. It's quite interesting to note that this year with the wildlife safaris that I do with the Wildlife Trust, I had, a handful, admittedly this year, but people coming specifically from the mainland to do that trip. Yeah, that was the reason for them coming to the islands, was to come and do that trip with me. So I think there's a definite build for that. And again, it's probably people in St Mary's and that sort of community which probably need to take more a handle on this. But I think they're missing an opportunity at the moment. I mean, it's a massive part of my business now. This whole sustainable bird tourism. We do the Wildlife Trust. You know, the boat was full every day that I was doing it this year.
Absolutely, John, and I think you're an excellent ecotourism provider. And but I think there are other opportunities, as you say, coming out of St Mary's. But I think you're absolutely leading the way in providing very rich seabird ecotourism experiences. There is an element, though, of having to quantify all of that, and it would be interesting to get your sort of numbers of people on board. Would be very interesting to look at.
Yeah, happy to do that. Happy to share that, Rob. That's fine. It's not a problem.
Yeah, that's brilliant to hear, John, and something I wasn't, you know, in terms of getting that dialogue and that feedback of the people that were coming on your trips were coming specifically for that experience is fantastic to hear. And again, you know, that having that model there to build on from people on St Mary's is a real positive. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm just going to have a look back to the chat to see if there's any more questions. Penny Rogers again, our island partnership talks of encouraging more dog-friendly holidays here. Would this have an impact on natural history? Jaclyn, in particular, do you have any experience with sort of, obviously, you know, your focus is obviously rodents and rodent eradication, but you know, in terms of disturbance from, obviously cats are probably a bigger focus as well, but from dog disturbance on islands that you've worked on before, do you have any experience of that?
Yes, definitely on Lord Howe. I think what I'd like to say to everybody on that one is there's not enough time to get into that one. Julian, as the interim CEO for the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust, he's obviously will be working hard on all the things that he has to do, because there's a lot of work for him and the Rangers, and one of them has been a dog policy. I think what I'd like to just do in this call is say what would probably be good in the future, but it all depends on the decision makers, is to have a dog working group, because there's a lot of thoughts around that. Again, strong values, but we all know that there is a disturbance factor, particularly when it comes to waders, and it's how we go about that. So as I say, at 37 minutes past 9 in the evening, probably not the question to answer now, but I've certainly picked up on that, Penny, and having spent a bit of time working at IP and spoken in the office about my opinions on it as a conservationist, it's one that would be great to pick up in another forum. Just to say to everybody as well, because I'm the host of this, we are now running over and we will shortly be kicked off our Zoom call. I do have a massive favour before everybody leaves. So I don't know if, Scott, you just want to check any more questions beforehand, before I ask my favour? Oh, you're still on mute there. Yeah.
Oh,
we got you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you got me. Yeah, question from Graham Jury, I think. Do you have any updated info on Henderson Island?
Yes, we do. We all know that Henderson's the one that failed because it wasn't mapped correctly. Yeah, when I went to Lord Howe, just so you know, Bloomin' Henderson, it got to the stage where I had to say to people, we're not going to talk about Henderson. We have to move on. It's an entirely different methodology, and we're going to map Lord Howe correctly, and we haven't got the coconuts. There's no coconuts here. Just to say with Henderson now, what is happening is there's more funding bids going in for Henderson and Tristan Lacuna, and that's because of Gough being underway. Well, underway and hopefully completed. They now wait for the results. So it's on the radar. Henderson back in the picture. So thank you for that.
I think Mike might just have said 10 seconds to me, but maybe not. So I think we might be able to lose at any minute.
Well, everybody, my ask, if it's okay, is if you could turn on your cameras for your beautiful faces, would I be able to take a screenshot of the 3 screens you're all across and use them on social media platforms with permission from you all? If you don't want to give it, leave your camera off. If you do want to give it, try and get the camera up higher. Only because I've had experience of this. High is always better. So with your permission, I'm going to take 3 images. I'm going to do it where your names aren't on there, so it kind of helps with GDPR, and it'll be for use between all of the partners. So here goes. Big smiles, please. Cheese. That's the first one. I'm now going to the second one. Look at you. Big smiles, please. And the third one. Here goes. And finally, thank you. Thank you. I know the one it's definitely going to go on is Twitter for Biosecurity for Life, if you're all happy with that. My boss loves me to tweet. I often forget all the things I can tweet. You don't want to be tweeting pictures of rat poo. Nobody's that interested. So they'll be more interested in this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jaclyn and Vickie, and to Julian. And from myself and the Scilly Bird Group, and from Jaclyn and the RSPB, and from Julian and Vickie, the Scilly Wildlife Trust, I'd like to give a massive thank you to everybody that's tuned in to us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been educational. I hope it's been good fun. And hopefully, I don't know, Jaclyn, Vickie, Julian, maybe we can do something similar in the future. It's been really enjoyable, and yeah, from Scilly, from the what should be hopefully in the future log up at the Sloanian Club, I'd like to say a big thank you, and we hope to see you very, very soon. So thank you all. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon.